Out of every 100 flamethrower operators deployed in the Pacific Theater, only 10 made it home. Their average combat life expectancy was measured in minutes, not hours. They were simultaneously the most feared and most vulnerable soldiers on any battlefield. But the real story of how they died is far more disturbing than most people realize. And you're about to find out why. When military historians discuss World War II casualties, they typically focus on infantry losses, bomber crews, or submarine operations. But there's one group that faced odds worse than almost anyone else: the men who carried flame weapons into combat. These weren't regular soldiers handed a particularly dangerous weapon. They were specialists, trained for weeks on equipment that required constant maintenance, precise technique, and nerves most people simply don't have. Yet their survival rate was abysmal. To understand why being a flamethrower operator was essentially a death sentence, you need to understand what the weapon actually was. The M2 flamethrower used by American forces consisted of 3 pressurized tanks strapped to a soldier's back. 2 large cylinders held approximately 4 gallons of thickened gasoline, a napalm-based fuel that stuck to whatever it touched and burned at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The smaller center tank contained compressed nitrogen that propelled the fuel through a metal wand with an ignition system at the tip. The entire assembly weighed 70 pounds when full. That's 70 pounds of highly flammable liquid and compressed gas strapped directly to your spine. And here's the critical detail most people miss. Those tanks weren't armored. They were just metal cylinders, about as protective as a beer keg. A single rifle round in the right spot could rupture them. A piece of shrapnel could puncture the fuel line. Any penetration meant you were now wearing an incendiary bomb. This brings us to the first major cause of death for flamethrower operators: catastrophic equipment failure. The tanks themselves were prone to leaking, especially after repeated use or rough handling. Valves could fail. Seals could crack. The ignition system could malfunction and fire backwards. And when something went wrong with a flamethrower, it went very wrong, very quickly. There are documented cases from Saipan where operators triggered their weapons only to have the ignition system fail to deploy forward. The stream of fuel would shoot out, hit the faulty igniter, and the entire backwash would engulf the operator in flames. Their own weapon would kill them before the enemy even knew they were there. Squad members reported hearing screaming and turning to see their flamethrower operator rolling on the ground, covered in burning napalm, begging someone to shoot him. But equipment failure wasn't random bad luck. It was made worse by the second major killer: enemy targeting. Japanese soldiers, particularly in the Pacific Islands, learned very quickly what those distinctive 3-tank backpacks meant. Training manuals recovered after the war showed that Japanese forces were explicitly instructed to identify and eliminate flamethrower operators as their highest priority target. The reasoning was simple and brutal. A rifleman could kill 1 or 2 enemies before being suppressed. A machine gunner could pin down a squad. But a flamethrower operator could clear an entire bunker complex, burn out cave positions, and force defenders from fortifications that were otherwise impregnable. More importantly, the psychological impact of flame weapons was devastating. Soldiers could face bullets and artillery, but the primal terror of burning alive broke defensive lines in ways conventional weapons couldn't. So the moment a flamethrower operator revealed himself, every enemy weapon within range would orient toward him. Rifle fire, machine guns, mortars, grenades, everything. The Japanese learned to wait. They wouldn't shoot at the approaching Americans immediately. They'd let the squad get closer, identify who was carrying the flamethrower, and then focus all their fire on that one man. Combat reports from Palaleu describe flamethrower operators being killed within seconds of beginning their approach. One Marine recalled watching his unit's flame operator take 11 separate hits in less than 5 seconds, the rounds stitching across his tanks and body before he even reached effective range. The worst part is that many of those hits struck the fuel tanks first. The operator would be wounded, unable to move, and then the fuel would ignite. His own squad would have to watch him burn, often for minutes, unable to help. But even if an operator survived enemy fire and equipment failure, there was a third danger that killed more of them than most people know: friendly fire. Not in the traditional sense of being shot by their own side, but something arguably worse. The nature of the weapon itself made friendly casualties almost inevitable. Flamethrowers had an effective range of only about 60 to 80 feet, and that was in perfect conditions. Wind could cut that range in half or worse, blow the burning fuel back toward friendly positions. In the chaos of close-quarters combat, especially in jungle or urban environments, it was nearly impossible to ensure that friendly troops weren't in the danger zone. There's a documented incident from Okinawa where a flamethrower operator engaged a Japanese position inside a damaged building. He didn't know that 3 Marines from another squad had entered through a rear entrance seconds earlier, attempting to clear the same position from the opposite direction. When he fired, the stream of napalm filled the interior space. All 3 Marines inside died. The operator survived, but had to be physically restrained by his squad mates. He never returned to combat, but the friendly fire problem went beyond accidental burns. When a flamethrower operator was hit and his tanks ruptured, the burning fuel didn't just consume him, it sprayed everywhere. Burning napalm would coat anyone within 15 feet. Squad members trying to help their wounded flame operator would find themselves on fire. Medics rushing to assist casualties would be caught in the secondary ignition. One sergeant from the 4th Marine Division described it in his after-action report. When Davis got hit, his tanks went up like a bomb. The fuel just exploded outward. It got on Morrison and Yates. They were rolling on the ground trying to put themselves out. But that stuff just keeps burning. You can't smother it. You can't brush it off. It sticks to you. We lost 3 men in about 30 seconds, and only one of them was shot by the enemy. This created a horrifying tactical dilemma. Flamethrower operators were essential for clearing bunkers and fortified positions, but their presence endangered everyone around them. Squads would often assign men to hang back, specifically to shoot their own flame operator if his tanks were hit, to spare him dying by fire. It was considered an act of mercy. The psychological toll on both the operators and their squad mates was immense. Imagine being assigned as the designated mercy killer for your friend. Imagine being the operator, knowing that your own brothers in arms were prepared to shoot you in the head to save you from burning alive. This wasn't hypothetical. It happened regularly enough that it became informal standard procedure in many units. And here's perhaps the darkest aspect of all. The enemy knew about this arrangement too. Japanese forces learned that if they could wound a flamethrower operator badly enough that he couldn't move, but not badly enough to rupture his tanks immediately, American soldiers would hesitate. They'd try to save him. They'd cluster around him. And then the tanks would go up, killing 4 or 5 men instead of 1. There are after-action reports that describe Japanese snipers specifically aiming for the legs or abdomen of flamethrower operators, deliberately avoiding the tanks, trying to wound rather than kill outright. The goal was to create a trap, and it worked often enough that some units began a horrific policy. If the flame operator went down and couldn't immediately get back up, no one was to approach him. They'd call in covering fire and wait. If the tanks went up, they went up. Better to lose 1 man than 5. The ones who did survive combat faced another battle entirely. The psychological scars of operating a flamethrower went beyond typical combat trauma. These men had used a weapon that killed in perhaps the most horrible way imaginable. At ranges where you could see faces, hear screaming, smell burning flesh. Many operators reported nightmares for decades afterwards. Some refused to go near fire for the rest of their lives, couldn't light a stove or sit by a campfire. One veteran, interviewed in the 1980s, described his recurring dream. "I'm back there, and I'm firing into the cave. But this time I can see them. Not shapes, not shadows. People. I can see their faces. I can see them trying to get away from it, climbing over each other. And I can't stop firing. My finger won't let go of the trigger. And I wake up smelling it. That smell. It's been 40 years and I can still smell it." The military knew the statistics. They knew flamethrower operators had life expectancies measured in minutes. They knew the weapons were as dangerous to friendly forces as to the enemy. But they kept using them because they worked. A single flamethrower could accomplish in seconds what would otherwise require hours of fighting and dozens of casualties. The tactical value outweighed the individual cost. By the end of the Pacific War, flamethrower operators had become, in effect, expendable specialists. Units would receive fresh operators as replacements, knowing they'd likely be requesting another replacement within days or even hours. Some veterans recall that new flame operators wouldn't even unpack their personal belongings. There was an unspoken understanding that they probably wouldn't need them. The casualty rates tell the story in numbers. In the Battle of Iwo Jima alone, of 380 flamethrower operators deployed, only 18 survived the battle. That's a 95% casualty rate. In some units, the survival rate was even worse. The 5th Marine Division reported that they went through 47 flamethrower operators in just 12 days of fighting. Most were killed within their first combat engagement with the weapon. These weren't just numbers in a report. These were men who knew exactly what they were volunteering for. Because in most cases, they did volunteer. Command would ask for flamethrower operators, and men would step forward, knowing the odds. Some did it for the extra combat pay. Some did it because their friends had been killed, and they wanted revenge. Some did it because someone had to, and they'd rather it be them than force it on someone else. The dark truth about flamethrower operators isn't just that they died at astronomical rates. It's that everyone knew they would die, from the operators themselves to their commanding officers to the men fighting beside them. It was an accepted fact. The weapons were necessary, the casualties were inevitable, and the men who carried them were, in the coldest possible calculation, sacrificial pieces in a larger strategic game. After the war, as military technology advanced, the role of portable flamethrowers diminished. Newer weapons could accomplish similar tasks with less risk to the operator. But for a few brutal years in the Pacific Theater, thousands of men strapped on those 3 tanks and walked into hell, knowing they almost certainly wouldn't walk back out. Their story is one of the darkest chapters of modern warfare, not because of enemy cruelty or strategic failure, but because of the simple, terrible mathematics of acceptable losses. They were the most effective weapon against fortified positions, and that effectiveness was bought with their lives, measured out in 70-pound increments of fuel and compressed gas. If you want to hear more untold stories from history's darkest corners, support this work by subscribing. These stories deserve to be remembered.